Buckle up, folks. This is gonna be a rough one. I've never gotten to as many Twitter arguments as I have in the last week. I cannot believe what's going on. There is hypocrisy, there's inaccuracy, degrading information from respected journalists and physicians. But I think we should start with President Trump being diagnosed and dealing with COVID-19. The way I actually found out about President Trump's diagnosis was that I was woken up 3 or 4 or even 5 times in the middle of the night by TV producers and stations asking me to come on to talk about the president's health. But when I investigated further, the only thing we knew at that moment was that President Trump tweeted that he tested positive for COVID-19, along with the First Lady. Here's the problem with going on television without any information. You're bound to speculate. And when you're speculating, you're practicing what's known as tabloid medicine. This is a very inaccurate and unethical way to talk about health. You're really speculating about a patient's health who is not your patient and someone who hasn't given you explicit permission to talk about their health. So not only are you doing something unethical, it's also going to be inaccurate because you're guessing. And I did not want to be guessing, so I turned down those opportunities, even though I love talking about COVID-19 and putting accurate information out there. To my dismay, I saw conversations the next day in the media that went as such.
Dr. Bhattacharya, what do you see in that video? Does that give us any sense of the president's condition, or does he look okay? Some people thought he looked a little pale.
Something that also upset me that day was seeing Med Twitter for my fellow physician colleagues explode with negative commentary, wishing that Trump passes from COVID-19, wishing harm or demise to him, which goes against every medical rule in the book. When we took our oath, it was to first do no harm and provide the best care to every patient, irrespective to geography, race, criminal status, political biases. So to see doctors say that some patients shouldn't get better is just awful. I was incredibly proud of Vice President Joe Biden coming out and saying that he wishes President Trump a speedy recovery, that they don't want to badmouth him in this given moment. That is the right thing to do. And I believe my fellow physician colleagues should be leading the way in that charge. Now let's move on and talk about what's going on from Trump's organization standpoint, the way that they're handling COVID-related messaging and the messaging about President Trump's health. Honestly, it's horrible. It's impossible to know whether they're telling the truth, if they're simply confused, if they're getting facts wrong. I've actually seen President Trump's personal doctor come out and make questionable statements where I can't even follow the story. Did he get oxygen? Did he not get oxygen? What were the medications that he was given? When were the medications given? The timeline is all over the place and it's difficult to tell what's what. This list of all the medications and supplements that President Trump has received make no sense to me from a scientific standpoint. Many of these treatments are under an emergency use authorization where it should be reserved for those who are most ill, those who have no alternative means of getting better because they're not proven. They haven't been FDA approved. And yet President Trump got all of them. Either the president was more ill than they let on, or the president was getting a lot of treatments prematurely. And this point is what really gets me the most upset. It really functions as the worst example of how media has become more gossip than journalism, where you're valuing popularity on Twitter over journalistic integrity and accuracy. And I'm specifically talking about the negative labeling of the president's personal physician being a doctor of osteopathic medicine, a DO. Folks, there are 2 types of practicing physicians here in the United States, MDs and DOs. They both go through 4 years of medical school. They then go into a residency program where they become specialized in their training. In fact, now that the residency programs have merged, DOs and MDs train side by side. They oftentimes take the exact same board exams, the same licensing exams in order to practice medicine. The fact that we have some journalists tweeting that the president's doctor is bad or wrong or a worse doctor because of his degree is shameful and horribly inaccurate. The one that I took exception to the most was by a screenwriter by the name of Eric Haywood. Look, I'm sure, checks notes, Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine is a fine achievement, and Dr. Conley had to study super hard to earn his certificate, degree, I don't know, man, whatever. Your little president is being treated by someone a couple notches higher than an acupuncturist. Sorry to this country. What? As an individual who frequently advocates to have decreased discrimination and stereotyping in this nation, you are doing just that, sir. And on top of it, you're mad at Trump's administration for spreading potential misinformation. You are doing just that. DOs are just as equally licensed to practice medicine here in the United States and in 50 countries abroad. In fact, there's over 120,000 practicing DOs out there, and God forbid you end up in an emergency room or in a trauma situation, I'm sure you're not going to be checking if there's a DO or MD saving your life. You're going to trust that this doctor, whoever they may be, will be acting in good conscience to save your life, despite your nasty comments above. And I have to give a huge thank you to my MD colleagues who jumped at the defense of doctors of osteopathic medicine. Those who tweeted in support, explaining that we work side by side, many times not knowing who's an MD and who's a DO. Before, I used to think that these types of tweets were largely coming from institutions that perhaps didn't have the highest journalistic integrity. And then I saw a tweet by Ryan Leza, the chief Washington correspondent from Politico and a senior political analyst at CNN. DO Twitter, which by the way is Med Twitter because DOs, MDs are both doctors, is mad at me for pointing out that Conley is not an MD, but they are clearly not sending their best. I don't know what journalist who works for these legitimate companies has the gall in the midst of a pandemic where over 120,000 doctors are acting as frontline healthcare workers to say that we're not sending our best. Osteopathic physicians died while you write articles at home. How dare you attack these doctors? These are women and men putting their lives on the front lines. If a nurse said something you didn't like, would you say nurses aren't sending their best? The fact that you feel comfortable putting this out there and not deleting it after you get negative feedback for it speaks volumes about the lack of caring you put in the accuracy of your tweets. We should not be judging doctors based on the letters after their name, but instead judging them by their bedside manner, their ability to heal patients, their ability to fight misinformation, and their ability to connect to other humans. And a little fun fact for Ryan here, Vice President Biden's personal physician is also a DO. So clearly we are sending our best. Or is it only our best when it suits you? Here's Christina Farr's tweet. I'm disturbed that anyone, let alone 13% of Americans, say the most important way they get their news is YouTube. No wonder belief in conspiracy theories is so prevalent. I had a lot of problems with this, so I responded. Not only do major news organizations post a ton of content on YouTube, but so do legitimate medical sources like the CDC, WHO, and individual doctors like Mama Dr. Jones, Midlife Crisis, and myself. I would also venture to say that mainstream media has done less than an ideal job covering COVID-19 anyway. The reason I say this is because I have several videos fact-checking the media in their coverage of COVID-19. I'm not saying there isn't good info on YouTube. I'd instead suggest that it's highly variable and oftentimes can be extreme and polarizing in nature. Information gleaned from traditional news outlets is not the same. There are checks and balances as well as editorial oversight. I don't understand, because if I watch CNN and Fox News, it looks like I'm living in two different countries. The points of views don't align at all. So there's a huge variability even on television. Mainstream media has taken this extremist approach where you don't know what you're getting, and there's huge variability in mainstream media as well. So to critique people getting their information on YouTube is unfair. When we see how much journalistic integrity has been degraded in this country, I think it's fair that certain individuals will trust Mama Dr. Jones before they trust One America News. We should not judge people for that. I think President Trump certainly acted inappropriately when he decided to take a cruise in his armored SUV in the midst of his stay in the hospital. We have enough difficulties keeping patients safe and staff safe when it comes to COVID-19. Making these unnecessary motions just put a lot of lives at risk. But at the same time, I strongly disagree, vehemently disagree, if you will, with tweets like this. Congress might want to defund Walter Reed. It is a public health hazard. This is written by an MSNBC contributor and Washington Post columnist trying to encourage defunding of a veterans hospital because she didn't like how they handled the President Trump situation? Our anger towards our political foes has gone so far that we're willing to let people lose their lives because we disagree with them. When did the disagreement become this bad that you're willing to allow bystanders to get hurt in this process? To hurt veterans because you don't like the way something was handled? There's better ways to speak up. And I think the only thing these messages do is improve Twitter followings and like counts because they're so extremist. You're not bringing people together. You're not improving the world. This type of rhetoric should be shut down. And I'm not saying shut down by Twitter, it should be shut down by you and I. In the midst of filming this video, President Trump actually put out a message saying that we shouldn't be afraid of COVID-19, that he dominated, we're all gonna beat it. Well, President Trump, if we're being honest here, over 200,000 Americans have lost their lives to it who didn't beat it. So to downplay it like this is inaccurate and unfair. There are things we can empower ourselves with. We should be alert and up to date as best as we can be so that we can make the best decisions for ourselves and our families. It's pretty incredible, but the stay alert, not anxious mantra has really held up from day one of this pandemic. But the message of don't be afraid, we'll all beat it and we'll all dominate is not true. Many people will continue to lose their lives. So we need to be smart. We need to wear masks. We need to socially distance. The fall season is upon us and things can get really bad if there is a second wave. We are more prepared than we were before. We are actually making major adjustments in our medical institutions in terms of treatments, care, additional units, staffing, personal protective equipment. So we are gonna fare better than we did in the beginning of this pandemic. But it doesn't mean that it's a joke and we shouldn't take it seriously. The 1 million death mark recently was just passed with COVID-19 worldwide. That's a somber reminder of how serious this virus is. And the last thing I urge everyone at home to do is get your flu shots. Because when there's already tremendous pressure on the hospitals, we want to make sure as few people as possible are getting sick with flu, especially because we have a vaccine that is safe, that almost everyone universally should be getting. In fact, I just got mine the other day, and I'm going to highlight it for you on one of my hospital vlog videos. But for now, I want you to check out my other day in the life video here in the hospital as an osteopathic physician, or check out me debunking more myths about COVID-19 here. As always, stay happy and healthy.